Her scream sliced through the silence, raw and desperate. A mother's cry that shattered the fragile walls of her apartment. Emily held her son close, her arms trembling as if protecting him from the world itself. Her husband's eyes blazed with betrayal, his fists clenched, his chest rising like a storm about to break. He shouted words too sharp to remember, and before she could breathe, he stormed out, the slam of the door echoing like an explosion. Sirens wailed in the distance, filling the air with dread, a soundtrack to the end of what she once called family. Emily whispered, "It's over, Jason." Though he was gone, her voice trembling as much as her heart. Her son clung tighter, his small fingers digging into her blouse, his sobs muffled in her chest. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders, crushing yet forcing her to stay strong. Fear burned in her chest, but so did something else, resolve. Nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouting. Emily sank into the worn couch, her son still in her arms, his tiny body trembling. She whispered, "It's just us now," her voice breaking but steadying as she repeated the words. She thought of the years spent patching cracks in her marriage, the long nights hoping Jason would change, and the sacrifices she made in silence. Each memory pressed on her like stones stacked on her chest. Yet in the weight of loss, a flicker of defiance stirred. She told herself, "We will endure even if the world turns against us." The thought scared her, but it also lit something fierce inside. Her son shifted, his voice small. "Mom, are we safe?" She kissed his head and answered, "As long as I'm here, you will always be safe." The ticking clock on the wall filled the silence, each second louder than the last. Emily thought of bills piled on the counter, the job she could barely hold, and the emptiness Jason left behind. She wanted to scream, but her son's soft breathing kept her anchored. She stroked his hair, whispering, "We'll face it all together." Shadows stretched long on the walls, reminding her of the emptiness she felt inside. Still, she clung to the warmth of the child against her chest, the single reason she had to keep breathing. Emily's phone buzzed on the coffee table, its screen glowing like a beacon. She flinched, afraid of Jason's name flashing again, but it was only a bill reminder. She sighed, the weight of debt mixing with betrayal. She whispered, "They won't take you from me," clutching her son tighter. The silence answered her with only the hum of the refrigerator, a sound that felt like the edge of loneliness pressing in. She closed her eyes and imagined a future where she stood taller, but right now all she could do was breathe. The night stretched endlessly. Emily tucked her son into bed, smoothing the blanket over him as if to shield him from more than just the cold. She lingered, watching his chest rise and fall, her heart swelling with love and fear. She whispered, "Sleep well, my brave boy," kissing his forehead. Alone again, she stood by the window, looking out at the street lights and the empty path Jason had taken. The world outside felt menacing, yet she pressed her hand against the glass, promising herself that no matter what storm came next, she would not break. Morning light crept through the blinds, painting stripes across Emily's tired face. She hadn't slept, her mind replaying the slam of the door over and over. The weight of silence felt like another presence in the room, pressing against her chest. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, each envelope a reminder of how fragile her world had become. Her son shuffled in, rubbing his eyes, his small voice cutting through the stillness. "Mom, is Dad coming back?" She swallowed hard, forcing a smile she didn't feel, whispering, "No, sweetheart, but we'll be okay." The words hurt, but she had to believe them for his sake. She touched his cheek, her fingers trembling as warmth from his skin steadied her heart. In that moment, she realized survival meant holding her ground, no matter how broken she felt inside. The apartment was too quiet, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock. Emily poured cereal into a bowl, her movements slow, mechanical, like a machine running on fumes. Her son sat at the table, staring at the spoon in his hand, as if hoping it would bring answers instead of food. She forced herself to sit across from him, forcing a smile as she said, "Eat, baby. You'll need your strength." Her voice cracked, betraying her exhaustion. He nodded without looking up, the weight of confusion heavy in his small shoulders. Emily watched him, guilt clawing at her heart for making him live in a world already so broken. She promised silently, "I'll carry the weight, not you." The vow settled like iron in her chest. Later that day, Emily stepped into the hallway of her apartment building, clutching her purse as though it might hold her together. The walls smelled of mildew, paint peeling in jagged strips. Neighbors passed with hurried steps, avoiding her eyes, whispers trailing in their wake. She felt exposed, as if everyone knew the storm raging inside her. A woman down the hall gave her a sympathetic glance, but Emily lowered her gaze, unwilling to accept pity. Her son tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mom, let's go." She nodded, her jaw tight, forcing herself forward. She told herself every step mattered, even the ones that felt impossible. Outside the sun was bright, but instead of warming her, it highlighted the cracks she tried so hard to hide. At the bus stop, Emily felt the stares of strangers, each glance a weight pressing deeper into her skin. She kept her arm wrapped protectively around her son, shielding him from the world. Her thoughts raced. How would she pay rent? How would she keep him safe? How would she hold it all together alone? The bus roared closer, its brakes screeching, and she imagined it swallowing them whole, carrying them toward a future she couldn't yet see. Her son looked up at her, his small voice steady despite the tremor in his lip. "We'll be okay, right?" Emily bent down, brushing hair from his forehead, whispering, Yes, we will. We have to be." The words were more than comfort. They were her anchor. That night, Emily sat at the small dining table, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows. Papers were spread before her, overdue bills, eviction notices, and a half-finished job application. She pressed her hands into her temples, the weight of responsibility crushing her chest. Her son slept in the other room, his soft breathing faintly reaching her ears. She whispered into the empty space, "I can't fail him. Not now." Her voice shook, but her eyes hardened with resolve. She picked up a pen and began filling out the forms, her hands trembling, but her strokes determined. Each word she wrote was a promise, each line a battle cry against the odds stacked against her. The following week felt like an endless storm. Emily sat at her office desk, papers stacked around her like walls closing in. Her boss hovered, his words clipped. "You're late again." She bit her tongue, swallowing the truth that sleep had been a stranger to her. Her son's needs came first, and her exhaustion was the price. She forced out, "It won't happen again," though she wasn't sure if she could keep the promise. Her coworker, someone she had once trusted, avoided her eyes, whispers exchanged with another across the cubicles. Emily's chest tightened. Betrayal wasn't just at home, it was here too. She thought of her child waiting at school, and the fear of losing this job burned her deeper than hunger. She whispered under her breath, "Hold it together, Emily. Just hold it together." Emily rushed through the schoolyard, breath uneven as she searched the crowd of children spilling into the afternoon sun. Her son spotted her, his face lighting with relief, but behind him, Jason leaned against the fence, smirked, twisting his lips. Emily froze, her pulse roaring in her ears. Jason stepped closer, voice dripping with venom. "You think you can keep him from me?" She clenched her fists, her voice low but firm. "You lost that right." The words shook in her throat, but she stood tall. Her son grabbed her hand, whispering, "Let's go, Mom." She pulled him close, shielding him with her body as Jason's laughter chased them across the yard. Fear lingered, but so did fire. She wouldn't let him win. That night, Emily sat with her best friend Claire, the only person she could still trust. Claire placed a cup of coffee in front of her, concern etched into every line of her face. "You can't fight him alone," Claire said softly. Emily shook her head, exhaustion shadowing her features. "I have no choice." Claire reached across the table, gripping her hand. "Then, let me help. You've carried too much on your own." The words cracked something inside Emily, a fragile piece she had been holding together with stubbornness. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent and hot, and for the first time in weeks she allowed herself to be vulnerable. She whispered, I'm so tired, Claire. Claire squeezed tighter, whispering back, then lean on me. The next morning brought another blow. Emily received a letter from her landlord, taped to her door, the words, "Final notice," glaring back like a verdict. Her knees nearly buckled, the hallway spinning as she clutched the paper. Her son peeked from behind her, asking softly, "What does it say, Mom?" She folded the letter quickly, forcing calm into her voice. "It's nothing you need to worry about." But inside, panic clawed at her stomach. Claire's words from last night echoed in her mind. She couldn't carry this alone anymore. She exhaled slowly, pressing her palm against the doorframe to steady herself, whispering, "I won't let them take everything from us." That evening, Emily sat on the floor of her son's room, toys scattered around her, the soft glow of a night light casting gentle patterns on the walls. Her son sat beside her, quiet but curious. "Why are you sad, Mom?" She pulled him into her arms, whispering, "Because life is heavy sometimes." He looked at her with innocent wisdom. "But you're strong, and you have me." The words struck her like a lifeline, his small voice giving her more strength than any promise she had made herself. She kissed his head, holding him close, tears slipping silently. For all the betrayal, for all the fear, she realized this was her anchor. She whispered into his hair, "You're my reason, and I won't ever give up on us." Morning found Emily counting minutes instead of hope. The office hummed like a hive that had no place for grief. Her boss called her in, his eyes cold with impatience that felt like judgment. He said, "Performance is slipping, and clients are asking questions." She nodded, because arguing would cost more than silence. She said, "I will fix it," and swallowed the knot that would not move. He slid a warning across the desk like a quiet sentence. Rumors buzzed outside the glass, and trust felt smaller than air. She thought of her son's lunchbox waiting by the door at home. The image steadied her like a thin piece of rope over a drop. She whispered, "Hold the line," and gathered the papers like a shield. She walked out, knowing the floor could open at any step. By noon, Claire called, her voice lined with worry and urgency. She said, "Jason has been asking around at my building." Emily froze, the words striking like ice across the ribs. Claire continued, "He told people you're unstable and hiding money." The lie stung with the precision of a blade she knew well. Emily said, "He wants to poison the ground before the fight starts." Claire's breath shook, then settled into iron. She said, "I will speak for you, and I will not bend." Emily felt gratitude rise like a breath after drowning. Yet fear stayed, heavy as a locked door in her chest. She said, "Thank you, but be careful with him." The line went quiet, and resolve filled the silence like light. A knock arrived that evening like a verdict in an old hallway. A woman with a badge stood straight, voice calm and formal. She said, "I'm Monica from Family Services, here for a welfare check." Emily's stomach dropped, but she stepped aside and breathed steady. She said, "You may come in," and guided her to the living room. The apartment was clean, thin on comfort, but strong on order. Her son waved shyly and returned to drawing with careful lines. Monica watched with eyes that measured safety like numbers. She asked questions that felt like small weights on the table. Emily answered simply, holding truth like a candle in wind. When Monica left, the door clicked and echoed like a test passed. After the visit, Emily found a hidden message on her bank app. A small transfer flagged from a name that felt like a bruise. She called Claire, voice taut as a wire pulled too far. She said, "The account shows a deposit I never made." Claire's silence cracked, then confession surfaced like thunder. She said, "I loaned you money last month and used his card by mistake." The room tilted as betrayal took a slow breath. Emily said, "He will twist this and claim fraud." Claire whispered, "I am sorry, and I will own it." Emily closed her eyes and steadied the reel of panic. She said, "Then we document everything and move." The plan became the only air left to breathe. Rain began near midnight, rattling the window like a drum for the tired. Emily stood by the glass and watched streetlights smear into ribbons. She said, "He will come hard, and I will not fall," and felt the words root. In the bedroom her son dreamed under a fortress of blankets. The apartment breathed, small but brave, and held their story like a box. Emily gathered documents into neat stacks that felt like armor. She wrote a list, each line a step out of the dark. She said, "Tomorrow I call a lawyer and face the noise." The rain softened, and her shoulders lowered like gates lifting. She turned off the lamp and let the night keep its watch. Resolve stayed, bright as a pilot light that refuses to die. The letter arrived folded in an envelope that carried no return address. Emily hesitated, fingers trembling, as if the paper itself whispered her name. Inside was a handwritten note, the script familiar yet ghostly. It read, "You are not alone. Call me." A phone number followed, scrawled in haste. Her breath caught, and memories flooded. The aunt who vanished after a bitter family fight years ago. Her son asked, "Who is it, Mom?" She said softly, "Someone I thought was gone." Fear and curiosity tangled like wires sparking in her chest. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the note under the dim glow, her heart asking if this was rescue or another trap. Emily dialed the number, her hands slick with sweat. The phone rang once, twice before a voice she knew from childhood answered. "Emily, it's Aunt Margaret." Silence pressed between them like heavy fog. Emily whispered, "Why now, after all these years?" Margaret's voice trembled but carried strength. "Because I couldn't stay away this time. I know what Jason is doing, and I can help you fight." Emily gripped the phone tighter, her heart battling between suspicion and relief. Her son tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Is it good news?" Emily's voice cracked as she said, "Maybe, baby, maybe." The next day, Margaret arrived in person. Emily opened the door, heart hammering at the sight of a woman both stranger and blood. Margaret's eyes softened, her voice gentle. "You look just like your mother." Emily stood frozen, torn between slamming the door and collapsing into her arms. Her son peeked from behind her, whispering, "Is she family?" Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, she's family." Margaret stepped inside, placing a worn leather bag on the table. She said, "I have documents, proof of what Jason has done." Emily's breath hitched, the weight of years lifting slightly as suspicion gave way to fragile hope. At the kitchen table, Margaret spread out files like cards in a dangerous game. Bank statements, emails, and letters, all pointing to Jason's manipulations and hidden accounts. Emily whispered, "How did you get these?" Margaret replied, "I've been watching from afar. I knew one day you'd need them." Emily's eyes filled with tears, rage and relief colliding in her chest. She asked, "Why now?" Margaret answered softly, "Because I couldn't watch him destroy you any longer." Her son sat nearby, coloring quietly, unaware of the storm his mother and aunt were preparing to face. Emily clenched her fists and said, "Then we fight." Later that night, after Margaret left, Emily sat alone with the documents. She traced her fingers over the proof, each line of text a weapon in a war she had been fighting blind. For the first time in years she didn't feel completely alone. She whispered to herself, "This changes everything." In the next room, her son slept peacefully, his small breaths carrying a rhythm of innocence. Emily folded the papers carefully, placing them into a folder like a soldier loading armor before battle. She stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, whispering, "We're not just surviving anymore, we're fighting back." The courthouse loomed, its cold stone walls reflecting a morning sky washed pale by fear. Emily gripped her son's hand until his small fingers tightened back, grounding her like roots. She whispered, "Stay with Claire today. I need you safe." He nodded, eyes wide, holding onto her strength as if it were his own. Inside, the air was sharp with whispers, footsteps echoing like verdicts already spoken. Jason stood across the lobby, suit sharp, smirk sharper, his lawyer at his side. Emily straightened her shoulders, chest tight but unbroken. She whispered to herself, "This is for him, not for me." The doors to the courtroom opened, and with a breath that tasted of steel, she stepped forward. Inside the courtroom, every sound seemed magnified, the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of papers, the distant cough. Emily sat at the table, her lawyer beside her, calm yet firm. Jason leaned back across the aisle, his smirk hidden in false charm as he whispered to his counsel. The judge entered, robe flowing, and the room rose in silence. Emily's pulse hammered like a drum, but she held steady. The gavel struck, sharp as thunder. The judge said, "This hearing will determine the custody of the child." Emily closed her eyes for a second, whispering in her heart, "Hold me steady." When she opened them, resolve glimmered beneath fear. Jason's lawyer spoke first, his words sharp, painting Emily as unstable, a mother drowning in debt and grief. Each sentence cut deeper, but she kept her gaze locked on the table, refusing to flinch. Then came Jason, standing tall, his voice dripping with practiced sorrow. "I only want what's best for my son," he said, while Emily clenched her fists beneath the desk. Rage pressed against her ribs, but she knew silence was her weapon for now. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering, "Well, strike back soon." Emily nodded, her breath steadying. She thought of her son's smile, the way he held her hand in sleep, and it steeled her spine against the lies wrapping around the room like smoke. When it was her turn, Emily rose slowly, her knees heavy, but her voice steady. She spoke of nights spent working double shifts, of school lunches packed with love, though pockets were empty, of laughter carved from hardship. She said, "I have given everything I am to protect my child." Tears threatened, but she pressed them down, her words sharp with truth. Jason scoffed, but the judge's gaze narrowed, his pen pausing mid-note. Emily drew a deep breath, then placed Margaret's documents on the table. Bank statements, emails, proof of deceit. She said, "This is the truth he's hidden." The courtroom stilled, silence heavy with shifting tides. For the first time, Jason's mask cracked. The tension broke like glass when the judge leaned back, expression carved from stone. He said, "Evidence will be reviewed, but initial findings raise serious concern against the father." Jason shifted, his composure crumbling as whispers rippled through the courtroom. Emily lowered into her seat, her body trembling not from fear but from release. Her lawyer whispered, "We turned it." She nodded, pressing her palms together, whispering, "Thank you." In the gallery, Claire clutched her son's shoulders, whispering to him, "Your mom is fighting for you." The boy's eyes shone wide and proud, though he didn't fully understand. For Emily, the battle was not yet won, but the ground beneath her feet finally felt steady. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving behind echoes of battles fought with words sharper than knives. Emily remained seated, her hands trembling against the polished wood. The judge's ruling was clear, custody granted to her. Relief surged, but it did not feel like victory. It felt like survival. Jason stormed out, his face twisted with fury, but his shadow no longer chained her. Claire placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "You did it." Emily shook her head, whispering back, "We did it." Her son rushed into her arms, his small body colliding with hers, and she buried her face in his hair, inhaling the innocence she fought so hard to protect. In that embrace she found the strength to breathe again. That evening, Emily walked her son home through the city streets. Rain from earlier still shimmered on the pavement, neon lights reflecting in scattered puddles. Her son skipped beside her, holding her hand, his laughter light as bells. She smiled for the first time in weeks, though the scars beneath her chest still ached. She whispered to him, "The world is ours now, even if it's heavy." He looked up and said, "As long as I have you, it's enough." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they carried joy instead of grief. The night air was cool, wrapping them in a promise of tomorrow. Emily whispered, "We're stronger now, and we'll never stop fighting." Days later, Emily sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by quiet. Bills still waited, and the future remained uncertain, but the fear that once hollowed her had lessened. Margaret visited, placing her hand gently over Emily's. She said, "You have done what many could not." Emily looked into her aunt's eyes, seeing regret and love intertwined. She whispered, "Thank you for coming back when you did." Margaret smiled softly. Family is broken until it is rebuilt. Her son ran into the kitchen, waving a crayon drawing of the three of them together. Emily smiled through her tears, whispering, "We are finally whole." That night, Emily tucked her son into bed, smoothing the blanket with tender hands. He whispered, "Mom, are the bad days over?" She kissed his forehead and said, "The worst has passed, but life will always have storms. What matters is we'll face them together." His eyes closed slowly, trust written in every breath he took. Emily lingered, watching him sleep, her heart swelling with quiet triumph. She turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft glow of the nightlight painting warmth across the room. In the silence, she realized healing wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. On the final evening, Emily stood by the kitchen window, city lights flickering in the distance. The apartment was quiet, filled only with the gentle rhythm of her son's sleep. She placed her hand on his doorframe, whispering a silent vow. She walked to his bedside, sat down and let a smile spread across her face. A true smile, unburdened for the first time in years. She whispered softly, "We will be okay." The words did not tremble this time. They rang steady, like an anthem carried in her blood. She leaned back, listening to his breathing, the sound of hope alive in every inhale. Outside, the night felt less like darkness and more like possibility.